GNT show is intended for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. Live long and prosper, bitches.
Shall we just start right off the bat with a Las Vegas update?
Are we still talking Vegas, right?
We are.
Talking about Vegas.
Yes. You're coming to Vegas, right? Star Trek Las Vegas may take place every August, but on this show...
This is where we hang out the rest of the year.
Exactly.
The crew has been fatigued now from so many months in space, and they need to take a break. The landing party has been down to check out the terrain while the crew gets ready to play. They say there's only plant life living on this lovely rock, but a rodent up here's wearing a vest.
Jolan True, bitches. This is Gettysburg 7 coming to you from the floor of Star Trek Las Vegas 2014. To my left, your right. Today she's actually dressed in her Vina gear. It's Terry Lynn.
I have no idea what that is.
Vina. The cage.
Oh my God, I'm so tired.
Okay.
If you don't hear it in my voice, guys.
It's been like 2 hours of sleep a night.
You have no idea.
Our guest is the lovely and at this point very patient Mr. Eric Stillwell.
How
Sir,
you doing, Eric?
Go ahead and run down your credits for us.
Well, okay. If I start at the beginning, I was a production assistant on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Right. I was a script coordinator on Star Trek: The Next Generation.
That's pretty good.
I co-wrote Yesterday's Enterprise, the story.
And that's an episode no one remembers.
Yeah, it's
Oh, excuse me, it's horrible. Nobody knows which one that is, right?
That was like Code of Honor, right?
yeah. No, it was like Shades of Grey.
It was so not like Shades of Grey.
No, Shades of Grey was my very first screen credit.
Oh, really?
I did all the research for the clips that they used for that episode.
Yeah, but that's different than what was filmed.
Yeah.
The work you put into that, though, it really does show, because you helped them save a lot of money that season, and we appreciated that. And it was Riker on a slab. That didn't hurt.
Yeah, that makes you happy. But you know what actually depresses me about that episode? That was the last Pulaski episode, and we never got to... Terry and I are big Pulaski fans.
Okay. We're big Pulaski fans.
Okay.
And we were very upset, but...
Silence on the airwaves.
Silence on the airwaves.
We're on the floor, and people are cosplaying as they walk by, and Neelix and Kess just walked by.
And it's a good Neelix, and it's a great Kess, and I'm that is just too adorable.
But no, that was Pulaski's goodbye, but you all didn't know it, right?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So how long now did you...
Did you ever get to try Pulaski's chicken soup?
We're crazy, I know it. Now, how long did you got to work on TNG? Did you work on other productions after that?
Well, I had some fringe participation in Deep Space Nine because I worked for Michael Piller, who co-created the show, and later was a creative consultant. So I had to transcribe all of Michael's script notes for all the episodes. Same thing on Voyager, and on Voyager I actually co-wrote an episode, Prime Factors, during the first season.
Oh.
And then Michael also co-wrote and produced Star Trek Insurrection, so I typed that script in every version of it for like a year and a half.
And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, because we have a listener base that is totally focused on the art and of storytelling, and a lot of people don't understand the process that is behind the camera and what goes into the teamwork and the other parts of in Hollywood. And people think that it's just somebody who sits down and throws a bunch of words onto a bunch of pages and doesn't realize, all the little bits of effects that go in. Tell somebody what a script coordinator is. A lot of people don't even know.
Well, I as a script coordinator, what I did was I worked with the writing staff on the show to help type the scripts, proofread the scripts, get them printed, distributed, and whenever there were changes, we would do the changes and go through the same process all the time. But in my particular role on Star Trek, I also helped with continuity issues, because a lot of the writers weren't Star Trek fans. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them had more knowledge than others. So I would be there along with people like Mike Akuda and Rick Sternbach and other people, Richard Arnold, who would give notes on early drafts of scripts if something contradicted something that was like established in the original Star Trek or earlier episodes that had already been done.
how much change did Insurrection go through from the original concept?
Insurrection went through huge amounts of changes because
Really?
you have more time on a feature film compared to television. Because with television, especially back in the Star Trek days, we were doing 26 episodes a year, which is almost unheard of nowadays. Nowadays, you're lucky if you get a 13-episode season, and then they divide it in two, so you only get 6 episodes now, and 6 episodes but with a feature film, so going back to television, you have basically 7 days to get a script ready for production, 7 days to shoot it, and then you're already in post-production.
Right.
So we were always lucky if we had a script ready for the director the week before it was supposed to start shooting, and then sometimes they were giving him final drafts hours before the show.
Final revised draft 7.
And then there'd be multiple colored revisions throughout the time that we're actually shooting the show.
But part of your job, as you said, was continuity.
Right.
When those changes took place, how crazy were you?
Well, it's always crazy because of the time restrictions, and plus, while you're shooting an episode and revising the one that's literally in front of the cameras, you're also prepping the next script that's going to shoot next week, and working on post-production on the.
That's what I was going to ask. And working the.
So there's simultaneously multiple episodes going on all the time. So the showrunners like Michael Piller are crazed because Michael, even though he didn't get writing credit on all the episodes, rewrote or did revisions on or polishes on every single episode that he produced. So
what would be the biggest piece of advice to somebody who might be listening, who'd be interested in pitching stories or creating stories, even for themselves, in focusing on what makes a great Star Trek story?
Well, I think it's always good to find copies of the episodes that you like or the ones that were popular and read them, see how they're structured, and understand what made them great. I mean, earlier you asked me about Insurrection and how many drafts it went through. Because it was a feature film, they had a long prep time to get ready for it. And Michael did multiple drafts, and some of them were completely just tossed out and started from scratch because it's a more prolonged creative process. In fact, I wish I could tell you about a book that Michael wrote.
I was just going to ask about that.
It was really, unfortunately, it never got published.
And it was online for a very short time.
A couple times, I think it made it out to the interwebs, but Paramount kept shutting it down. Michael wrote this fabulous book called The Writing of Star Trek Insurrection, and it was basically his gift to writers to say, this is what this whole process was from start to finish. And it's basically a book about writing, and I always thought Michael Piller was a very successful with his writing because of the subtext of his stories, where you can talk about subject matters without literally talking about it, but talking about it in the subtext of what's going on between the characters. And Ronald D. Moore is one of the writers who I think really learned that talent through his sort of indoctrination with Star Trek, because he came on our show as a first-time writer who had never sold a script before, and now I think he's one of the best writers.
I don't think you'd hear very many of us argue.
Well, Battlestar Galactica the new version is all about the subtext of what is going on, and that's what I think makes successful stories. And Michael was very good at doing subtext in stories. So it's too bad. I know that Michael's widow, Sandra Piller, is still trying to get the book published, but because of some issues with copyrighted material that belongs to the studio, only Michael's original material could be included in a book, but originally it was supposed to include all the breakdowns and drafts and all the different elements that went into making the movie Star Trek Insurrection. I think the movie sort of gets a bad rap for not being one of the greatest Star Trek movies, but
I'm sorry, Insurrection's still my number 2.
I think it was your number 2 or 3.
And
our show, we've ranked the movies and hers mine it was in the middle of the pack because it was like a 2-hour episode with just amazing production values is how I saw it.
And I kind of
but the Enterprise E rarely looked better than in that movie.
Well, one of the reasons I liked it was because it was more like an episode, because the problem I had with the feature franchises is that there's so few of them that every single movie is sort of like, the Enterprise is the only ship in the quadrant. Really? In the whole freaking galaxy, the Enterprise is always the only ship around? I think what got lost in the features is that we went away from what made the show popular, because suddenly now Picard has to be an action hero instead of the normal Captain Picard that he always was for 7 seasons.
I think First Contact, it worked because of the battle and following it in, so they weren't the only ship, but it was the, pardon the pun, the logical way to get them.
Right. And you do, but I think what Michael was able to do with Insurrection was tell more of a character story than have it be the crisis to no crisis because the galaxy's about to blow up. It's like those kind of movie stories are unbelievable to me on a certain level.
No, you got to participate and write on one of my favorite episodes when we were talking about yesterday's Enterprise. That's still held in a lot of people's lists of favorites, very, very high up. What was it that made you, what part did you play in the writing of it? Who were your team members? How did that ensemble work?
Well, yesterday's Enterprise came together in a relatively unique fashion compared to most episodes of Star Trek, because my writing partner Trent Ganino had actually written a spec script for yesterday's Enterprise before I was involved with the project, but I was also working on my own spec script that was a little bit different, and he and I became friends because the script submission process was very lengthy back in those days, because we used to get 5,000 scripts a year, and it was my job to log them all in and assign them to readers, and we had to deal with union requirements where we could only use union readers, and then staff writers and producers on the show, between the time that they're prepping and writing and revising their own scripts, had to read all these scripts.
I'm just wondering when people slept.
It was great. Well, it's crazy. In television, a lot of people work like 60 to 80 hours a week, and I think producers never stop working.
And I'm not making a joke. That's what led to so many people being addicted to cocaine back in the 70s and 80s, was there not enough time in the day.
And so the interesting thing about yesterday's Enterprise is, so Trent wrote the script, and what it was about a ship from the past, the Enterprise C. He wanted it to be Enterprise A, but one of the rules was we couldn't do Kirk and Spock and all that, so he made it Enterprise C. And the ship comes through a time warp by accident and shows up in our time. But in his version of the story, there was no altered universe. There was no... I don't remember if there was a war with the Klingons or anything like that, or the Romulans or whatever.
Interesting.
But what it was a character piece on the dilemma of what do we do with these people, because the longer they stay, the more of a chance they could affect history. It was over about what could happen, not what did happen. And in the meanwhile, I was working on my own idea of doing an episode where the Enterprise goes back to the Guardian of Forever planet, and I wanted to bring Sarek as a character, because there had been a memo that had gone around like during the second season that said that they were never going to be able to afford Leonard Nimoy on the show, but Mark Leonard was interested if someone wanted to come up with a Sarek idea. So I had come up with this idea where the Enterprise is escorting Sarek back to the planet of the Guardian Forever, because a Vulcan archaeological team has been there for like 2 years doing research on ancient Vulcan history, and Sarek's going there to greet the returning team and escort them back to Vulcan. But when the Enterprise arrives on the planet and Sarek beams down, an accident happens and a phaser accidentally gets fired off, and it goes through the portal and kills Surak, who was
oh my god,
before the Vulcans became peaceful, logical. And so now the timeline instantly changes to this vast Romulan Vulcan empire where the Vulcans never be.
You're careful. He's gonna have to put on some. He's gonna have to put on some diapers here.
He's got Romulan tattoos on his leg. So the Vulcans never.
Somebody that was giving the Romulans love. No, you don't understand. The Klingons get it all, and I don't understand.
Well, and so that was the great thing. So the Vulcans never became peaceful.
That's
awesome.
So they joined forces with their Romulan cousins and created this vast empire. And as we enter the story, they've already wiped out the Klingons, and now they're working on the Federation. And the Federation is like on the verge of collapse. And in our story, Sarek sort of had the role that Guinan has in the final version, where he's trying to convince Picard, because he was down on the planet, his knowledge of time hadn't changed. So he's trying to convince Picard, this isn't what's supposed to, it was an accident. And Picard's like, no, you're a Romulan spy, and we're putting you in the brig, right? So there's this whole like story where Sarek is trying to convince Picard.
I'm sorry, I just got chills.
Our audience right now is just squeeing when they hear this.
This is awesome.
And then ultimately, he has to do the mind meld and tell Picard to see what I know and this whole kind of thing. Well, of course, I had also been at a convention up in San Jose where we had run into Denise Crosby at a convention. I used to run her fan club during the first season. I had a huge crush on her. And so she knew this, and she saw me at the convention. She said, oh, Eric, you should write an episode and bring me back on the show. And my writing partner, Trent, we had become friends by then. He was there because San Jose is his hometown, and he was like, so we're like, yeah, we should figure out how we could, like, combine, like, do both stories and in this
So the decision to combine the two stories was done by the two of you?
Actually, it was Michael Pillar.
Oh, okay.
Because when we came back to LA, apparently Denise's agents had made contact with the producers to let them know that she was interested. And Michael had put out word, if anyone has an idea for a way to bring back Tasha Yar, because she's dead, so we need an interesting way of doing this, let me know. And I heard this as a grapevine, and I ran into his office practically and did like the spontaneous pitch of the story where, well, Trent, I don't remember if Trent was with me or not because it's been 25 years, but it was like here's this like story and where we could bring back Tasha in an alternate universe where the timeline's been altered. Well, and Michael always had this thing about not wanting to use what he called gimmicks from the original Star Trek, because they always wanted Next Generation to stand on its own. Right. We don't want to use Sarek, we don't want to use the Guardian of Forever, blah, blah, blah. He's like, but what about that story Trent wrote where the Enterprise comes through time? What if you combine the two ideas together, and now there's an alternate timeline because the Enterprise C came through the time thing? And so Trent and they're like, yeah, we could do that. and so Michael said, okay, go home. You've got 2 weeks to write a story and bring it back to us. And so we did, and then...
Mind you, you had to do that while you were still performing your script coordinator duties. That's crazy.
And so, and that's the way it is. I mean, even with the writers on staff, they've got to attend meetings and go to production meetings and do rewrites on scripts, even though they're working on other scripts that people are waiting for. And so we wrote the story. It was a little rough around the edges, and we did a second draft of the story. The problem we were having was we couldn't figure out how does the Enterprise crew know that the timeline has been altered, because we're not at the Guardian of Forever planet. Nobody really knows. And so we were toying around with weird probes that had been launched through the anomaly beforehand that come back later, but the probes have recorded the actual...
How funny.
And it was too technical and it didn't involve character stuff, because that's what's really the strength of Star Trek is the character stories. So Michael said, well, why don't we make it that Guinan, she's an alien, maybe she has some super sensory thing, then she just knows that it's
and
all
her
wrong.
Background and everything was just vague enough.
Right. And so Michael came up with that idea, and it was perfect. And then, so eventually, because Trent and I didn't actually have experience writing the teleplays in the timeline that they needed to accomplish it. They turned it over to Ron Moore to polish it up and get it going. And then what was supposed to happen was in December of '89, we were gonna come back in January and do Yesterday's Enterprise in January, but it turned out that Denise Crosby and Whoopi Goldberg weren't both available that week in January that they wanted to do it, so the only time they could get both of them was the week after Thanksgiving. And so all of a sudden, like, it's the week of Thanksgiving, and Michael calls in the whole writing staff and says, okay, we're breaking the story over the holiday weekend, and everybody has to come back on Monday with one act written, right? So, so Ron Moore wrote an act, Michael wrote an act, Hans Beinwiller, Richard Manning wrote an act, I mean, Ira Bear wrote an act.
So it was like an all-hands-on-deck.
Well, and it was basically what everybody thought was going to be a cluster beep. And so
you can curse on our show.
So we were like, oh my god, this is going to be a clusterfuck, right? And so
did that feel good?
Well, no, it was depressing because everyone was like, this is going to be the worst episode we've ever done. You know, when you go to a movie and see 12 writers credits, you know, oh my god, it's been rewritten 40 times, and they fired 12 writers before they got to the fight. And it's like, oh my god, it's like our story's going to be ruined, right? But then I was so excited about the process, I just thought, it's going to turn out fine. I thought the script was great. And it was like they all came in and put it together and literally started shooting it like 2 days later. And everyone was still like all moping around like, oh, it's going to be a hodgepodge of crap. And I'm like, no, it's going to be great. And I was optimistic about it, and it turned out.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and you knew right after it was done.
And the look of that episode, too, was...
Yeah.
Oh, and see, that's the thing. Trent and I didn't even think they would have the budget to do stuff like what they did, so we didn't write all that stuff about the bridge looks different, and, you know, that's what the production team brought to it.
Really?
Because they have production meetings for every script, and usually it's basically so each department can come in and say, we can't afford this, and we can't afford that, you have to cut this and cut that, and usually what ends up happening is that all the revisions in the scripts are to save money. Like, well, we have to cut that scene because we can't afford 500 extras on Planet X.
And they had to, and now, did they have to create all new costumes, or did they just
they
tweak
just
one?
altered some things.
And that has one of the most famous
bloopers at the very end where Geordie's wearing the wrong uniform. But to me, I said, but that was really just a hint that the timeline wasn't perfectly restored, because later on
Sela comes back,
which wasn't our idea, but Ron came up with that idea later. I thought that was just a precursor of a slightly.
We'll take that in.
I'll take that retcon. Well,
I always have an explanation for everything that fits within the context of the universe, because fans never want to hear, why did the Klingon bumps change? Oh, because we didn't have any money in the budget. Well, really? What's the real answer?
They want to know the story answer.
Yeah, I have a question. You've mentioned him so many times, and on the Next Generation discs and things, you see the vignettes with Michael Piller. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about him? Because he really was, it seems, the most amazing man.
Well, Michael, I worked for him for 15 years. He was an amazing writer and very dedicated to his craft. I mean, I think one of the reasons I never was as successful as some other writers have been is because I just don't have the devotion to. Michael literally would come in at the crack of dawn to his office before anyone else was there, lock his office door, and put a "Do Not Disturb" sign on it, and commit himself to 4 or 5 hours of just writing every day, no matter what. And you have to be very disciplined, and when you're working another job on top of trying to write, that's very difficult to find that time without sacrificing quality of life issues, like with your relationships and friends and family. So I know you've read all the stories about how even the actors and producers from the original series all had divorces and families that felt it's very tough on relationships when you're married to a producer or an actor.
Kate Mulgrew has talked here at the convention about what it did for her as a mother.
And it's tough. And people like Jerry Taylor, who was a mom and a single mom, and dealing with stuff like that too. So it's like, it's very tough. So it's very amazing when people can make it all work. But Michael was very disciplined, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I think that he had a knack with subtext, because he could talk about something without ever actually saying it, and you just knew what it meant. And Michael had his hands in like every episode that we did, starting with the third season. I do think he gets his share of the credit for helping, what I consider saving Star Trek: The Next Generation, because I think one more year of the season 1, season 2 would have killed the show, but Michael kind of came in and turned it around. And it's kind of crazy what happened, because I was there during this process when the showrunner from the first 2 seasons decided to leave the show. They actually brought in another writer named Michael Wagner at the beginning of the 3rd season, but he was so not prepared for how intense it was going to be that he only lasted a few weeks.
Wow.
And Michael was sort of like the backup, plan B, Michael Piller. And so when Michael showed up, we were already in production. There weren't any scripts ready. I think there had been a writer's strike or something during the 2nd season too, so that had slowed everything down. And Michael literally just needed to start getting scripts. So he said, we're going to open up the script submission process.
So it was his
It was Michael Piller. He had to go and fight the studio. The studios hate anything like that, because everything has to come through an agent, everything has to be legal, and Michael's like, no, we need scripts really bad, and I want to open up this process to everybody, because the Star Trek fans know the show. It wasn't just about Star Trek fans, but fans who are writers know Star Trek better than anybody. He's like, we need this stuff, and that's how we got people like Ron Moore.
Amazing.
Ron Moore had never written for anything before he wrote his spec script for Star Trek, which was The Bonding. That was his first episode, and from there, they brought him in to do a second script and brought him on staff. People like Brandon Braga. Brandon was an intern from the Television Academy when he came to our show, and now he's an Emmy nominated director for Cosmos, and it's amazing, all the writers who've come through Star Trek
now
because of Michael. I think because of Michael Piller.
There's no, before we get on to what we call our James Lipton questions, which is something we attack everybody with, tell everybody what projects and you're working on currently.
Well, I'm currently between jobs, but I just spent 3 years working for Fox Broadcasting, the network, in the alternative reality television department. So I've been working.
That's an actual department?
Yeah. All the studios have alternative / reality television departments.
I'm sorry, look at this cosplay.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And our shows at Fox were American Idol, The X Factor, So You Think You Can Dance, and all the Gordon Ramsay cooking shows. So I spent 3 years getting to go to CBS, where we taped our live shows like American Idol, coordinating the live audiences and working with one of the vice presidents in our department. And so that was really kind of fun, because I got to explore a different realm of television. But
which did you prefer?
Well, it's a totally different world working for a network than working from a studio, because you're on the opposite end of the phone. Because literally, Star Trek: The Next Generation was lucky because it wasn't a network show; it was a syndicated show. So we didn't have network executives calling every week saying, "We don't like this, we don't like that." And Paramount, which produced the show, pretty much trusted the producers to deliver what they wanted to deliver. So we got very few notes from the studio, unless it was something completely controversial or something. Then they might chime in and say, well, we're not sure we want to do that. But by and large, we had a lot of creative freedom on Next Generation. But when you're working on most network shows, the network executives are constantly calling the network thinks you should change this or change that. And sometimes it's not always for the right creative choices. And so it was funny when I started working at Fox. I basically worked in a bullpen with a lot of other Fox executives and assistants, and they would always be you'd hear their executives calling out like, "Get Michael Dorn on the phone," or Jonathan Frakes, because they were directing episodes of Fox shows, and it was just so funny because I'm like, now I'm on the network side and they're like calling those people to give their notes to them, and I thought that was kind of funny. But it's a completely different thing that I really loved going to all the live shows because it was music oriented. Yeah. We had different, working on American Idol, like going to a free concert every week, and every week there was like a guest performer. It's always like some top of the line guest, like Jennifer Lopez or Nicki Minaj or whoever, and it was fun. It's a completely different thing.
So is Ryan Seacrest a robot, because he never sleeps either, does he?
Oh my gosh! Talk about producers that are like. He has so much going on. I mean, things that people don't even know. He's an executive producer on all sorts of other shows. Wow. And every once in a while, you'll catch the Ryan Seacrest company logo at the end of a show. Right. You're like, oh my God, that's another thing that Ryan Seacrest does. I mean,
he's got his radio show.
Radio shows, live American Idol shows, plus all the traveling around that they do for American Idol when they go to all the different cities. It's crazy. I had to book just the airfare and travel for my boss to go to some of those auditions, and I thought that was crazy. But there's people on those shows who have to book travel for like 300 crew and all the.
I gotta ask then, have people that you've been working with, like on the reality side and all, when they found out you worked on Star Trek, have they ever come up and said, "Oh my God, that like"?
Sometimes that happens, but my boss at Fox really wasn't a Star Trek fan, so she didn't really get the whole thing. And I would still come to Vegas every year, and she's like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Well, it's hard to explain if you don't get it."
You don't get it.
But
That's right.
The weird thing was I was also working in a crowd of people practically half my age now, who I don't even think were born when when Next Generation was.
You're probably right.
So so sometimes you'll find a fan in the crowd, but a lot of times people are just like, "Oh, wow, you worked on one of those shows." But it was still film.
There you go.
You typed on typewriters? What?
Yeah. No, seriously, when Next Generation first started, we had Selectric typewriters. The phones were still rotary dial, and they had just introduced PCs, but they were these enormous, screens that are 24 inches thick, and
word processors only had they only had like one line of digital readout, and you had to really scan through to find your code.
And even when we finally got full-size screens, we were on Next Generation, we were doing DOS. We didn't have Windows.
Right.
So every script had to be typed in DOS. So it was like, C:/ / and then you had to put a code in to tell it if it's a paragraph or a line of dialogue.
Oh my God.
This was like, and even before WordPerfect came out, I remember.
Well, and you could only put, at the most, one act on a disk, or it would crash the file. It would crash the computer if you tried to. So, now you can put a whole feature film on one file, and it's not a big deal. Back in those days, if you tried to save more than 20 pages into a file, it would crash your computer. Right. So we would have to take all the 5 acts of Star Trek, and then each one you would have to code, okay, Act 2 starts on page da-da-da, and the scene number starts with scene blah blah blah. So it's amazing what technology has helped speed up the process. I think people wonder, if at least I used to wonder this, if you think back to 70s television or 60s television when you were a kid, and you think, we used to watch Charlie's Angels, and you think, oh my God, you watch it now, it's like, oh my God, it's so simplistic and dumb and naive. Well, I think my theory is, television couldn't be more sophisticated. It's not like people weren't sophisticated in the 70s. They just didn't have the technology to be that sophisticated with television because they were on the same time constraints. But you can't start rewriting a script the day before you start shooting it if you don't have a computer. Because someone's got to sit there and type it. And the original Star Trek was typed on mimeograph paper with carbon sheets that you had to run through a mimeograph machine. So now when you look at television and you see the complexity and sophistication of the storytelling, it's all about the tools. Because the tools have made it possible to literally change something instantaneously.
Okay,
I mean, we started...
It's like now they can do it from a pad.
Yeah,
on
from
the
a
slide.
I was
phone.
going to say, but think of how meta that is. The fact that you worked on a show whose prop makers and imagine these pieces of
Right, because we
technology
didn't
that
even
actually
have.
allowed it to
Well,
work
even
on.
in the beginning of Next Generation, we didn't have the digital visual effects and the morphing technology that they had on Deep Space Nine didn't
Right.
even exist yet.
Right.
And when you're calling around the studio on a rotary dial phone and using stone knives and bear skins to like get the script, it makes you think, oh, the show really was like pretty cool for considering like what the tools were that they had to work with. But nowadays, I was going to use the example of when I worked with Michael Piller on the Dead Zone series, which I was an associate.
Anthony Michael Hall, right?
Yeah, and I was an associate producer on that, and also the script coordinator for the show. But I worked with another producer in Vancouver because the show was shot in Vancouver, but our offices were in Hollywood, and the scripts were just all sent up there electronically.
Yeah.
In the old days, even on Next Generation, we couldn't do that.
Right.
It's like, oh, we need to overnight this script FedEx to Vancouver or whatever.
Right, exactly.
And now it's like, oh, they got it.
Oh, yeah, like you said, on their phone or their tablet.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the changes. That's amazing.
And just with the advent of Windows technology and the new script writing softwares where you can put everything on one file.
And what most people don't realize, Bill Gates, Romulan. Just saying.
Yeah. Or a Ferengi.
No, he does too much charity work
Yeah,
to be
that's true.
Ferengi.
Well, we have a set, kind of a mishmash of questions that we ask all of our guests, and we call them our James Lipton questions because
Okay.
they were inspired by the Actors Studio, but we tweak
But
them.
with our own take.
We tweak them.
Is this where I have to think fast on my feet?
No,
And
we'll save the big one for last with
okay,
him.
you go for it then.
If you could be any race in Star Trek other than human, what would it be?
Wow. Vulcan.
All right, we'll take that. As a writer, I'm assuming you read. Do you have the opportunity to read a lot of books or other scripts? No.
Your time is a lot different than ours.
That's okay.
I'll be excommunicated from the planet.
No.
I-
Are there, and even more so, because there's a lot of our listeners whose times constraints are funneled. Is there a certain writer's books that even though you don't have time, you find the time to read?
I'm just bad. I'm a bad person. I honestly don't read a lot of books. I know that's a horrible admission.
Yeah, but you're so busy traveling with American Idol and all recently that, you know.
But I do like live in social media world, so I read a lot about articles and blogs and stuff. And before that, newspapers and news magazines. I'm always been more interested in reality. I worked in not that kind of reality, because TV reality is really fantasy reality, but my interest in reading has always been more in real world stuff and not fiction.
So you read a lot on.
Well, like I read a book by I can't remember his first name. His last name was Wilson, and he wrote the book on biodiversity that was the inspiration for Leonard Nimoy doing the whales in Star Trek.
See, now that I like that. That's really interesting.
And I'm sorry I forgot his first name,
that's
because he's
quite
a world famous ecologist and biologist, and he went all around and South American places studying species and plant types that haven't even ever been documented before.
So cool.
Because of the threat to biodiversity in the world. That was what inspired Nimoy to do
Interesting.
the whales and the ecology story in Star Trek 4. So I read his book, and I read A Brief History of Time by Hawkins, who was a huge Star Trek fan also. And I actually went to a Stephen Hawking lecture once while I was doing a Star Trek convention in Salt Lake City, and he happened to be in the town the same. And so I like that kind of reading when I do read like real world stuff or real universe stuff.
If you were the captain of a starship, what is that starship's name?
USS Republic.
Wow, that's the quickest answer
Because
we've ever had.
I was the captain of the USS Republic. You want to hear this story?
Yes.
when I was a kid, I was a huge Star Trek fan, and my friends and I in Eugene, Oregon, decided we were going to start our own local fan club, and we were going to be a starship, and I was the captain. And my best friend Tony was our Vulcan first officer, Mr. Zinn, and his last name was really Wynn, but we decided to Vulcanize it a little bit. And we had our whole crew, and we would go on excursions and missions. Like we would go to the state fair because Gene Roddenberry was coming to do his lecture.
Oh my God, this is so awesome.
And then eventually, this was before we were young and we were in high school and didn't realize that there were other Star Trek fans in the world. It was like we were the only ones in the universe who loved this show. And then one day I was at a used bookstore and I came across that old Star Trek catalog book that's like 100 years old, and I looked in it, and in the back it was like other fan clubs, and we were like, oh my God, there's other life out there, like, and we discovered this whole universe of fans, and we became part of Starfleet Command, right? And the organization back then in the late 70s was kind of defunct, and the people who had started it had sort of
gone their way.
Yeah, and gotten older and gotten busy with their real lives and stuff. So I basically took over Starfleet when I was in high school and created the international fan organization known as Starfleet today. And I started off because our local chapter.
You had started working on Star Trek.
Our local chapter was the USS Republic, and I was the captain of it. And then eventually I became the fleet admiral of Starfleet.
That is the coolest thing I've ever heard.
Well, the funnier thing is, when I was 15, around this time, I became pen pals with one of my very good friends, Barbara Watson. Her maiden name was Geeson, and she was from Baltimore. And we met through Majel Roddenberry's newsletter, where they would list pen pal people, like if you want a pen pal. And she and I hit it off writing to each other when we were 15, back in the 70s. And she started it actually one day because I had been remiss in responding to her letters.
And for our audience, this is not email, this is handwritten letters.
Yes, or typed. Or typed. And one day I got this postcard in the mail from her, and it was the Enterprise postcard probably from Lincoln Enterprises. And on the back it said, Captain Stillwell, please report to Starbase. We haven't heard from you and we need you to file your mission log or whatever. And then she signed it Commodore Geeson. And she's here this weekend actually at the convention because she was part of the wedding party for last night's Star Trek wedding. And we've known each other for like however many decades now, but but that's how it started, that I was the captain of the USS Republic, and then we started the local fan club.
I think that's my favorite answer I've ever heard.
And it was really cool that while I was doing that in high school and the beginning years of college, that we became like the world's largest Star Trek fan organization. And we had hurdles to overcome because the previous structure of the organization had some bad reputation and stuff. But we actually ended up with an article about the club in Starlog magazine the year that Wrath of Khan came out, and all of a sudden that one little half-page article, we were like flooded.
Starlog was the Bible for our fans.
And I think it was sort of like everybody was just discovering that, oh my God, there's other Star Trek, there's people out there like me, who want to do stuff like this. And we had banners and everything, like Federation banners.
That is the coolest. All right, zing him.
You were given the green light by CBS Paramount to kill a major canon character.
To kill?
A major, and it sticks. Who would you
From any of the Star Treks?
Any of the Star Treks.
Even if they're already dead? I could be really mean and say Captain Kirk, because
you're not the only person.
Because I'm not a big fan of William Shatner's. But I do love Captain Kirk, so since he's already dead, who would I kill off? nowadays with like Game of Thrones and all these shows, it's sort of trendy to kill off all your characters. So it wouldn't seem like a big deal anymore. Who would I kill off? What would be a huge shock to everybody? That's really hard.
Yeah, it is. That's why it's the last question.
Okay, McCoy. Because that would stun everybody. Not in the JJ universe, but in the original.
No, because we had someone yesterday who said they were thinking about it, what would have the most dramatic impact and send ripples through the show, and McCoy was one. I think that's our first McCoy answer.
That's our first McCoy, but it would make sense.
Because that person yesterday said Riker, because of what the effects would be. What the effects would be.
Well, yeah, he was the most lovable and sympathetic character.
And what it would do to Picard, who's had this right hand.
And it makes me think back to the episode For the World Is Hollow and I Touched the Sky, where wasn't that the one where he thought he had an incurable disease and he was going to die? And then you would find out, oh, we didn't cure him, he's going to die, and he's dead.
Yeah.
That would be really amazing. Well, what a great answer. And Eric, thank you again for joining us.
Oh, and I must say, before we go, I love DeForest Kelley. He was fabulous.
Oh, no.
He was like the first Star Trek actor who knew me by name and would recognize me at
Everyone says he was such a gentleman.
And he gave me some advice once about breaking into the business. I said, what's the key to success in Hollywood? And he gave me 3 words to live by. Persistence. And now when people ask me, I say, DeForest Kelley told me, and it's totally true, if you want to do something, you have to follow your dream and just be persistent with it and don't give up.
Now, how can our audience follow you?
I'm on Facebook, and I have hundreds of Star Trek fans who follow me on Facebook.
Well, that's how I recognize
They can Facebook me.
So great. Well, thank you once again, Eric Stillwell, for joining us on the G&T shows, our supplemental log live from the floor of the Star Trek Las Vegas convention. We appreciate your time. And
very
it was
much.
Just very, very fun. Don't forget to, if you want to see Eric's work, you can watch yesterday's Enterprise and remember how awesome the show really was. Thanks again.
Well, thanks. It was my pleasure.
Joe Lontrue.
Music for the G&T show is provided by Warp 11, Grethor, 5-Year Mission, and Andrew Allen's Smooth Federation.
G&T Show is a Busy Little Beaver production.
Some dude walks out, proceeds to explain what it's all about. I sure want to leave. I think you'd agree, but we cannot leave till we find out what it's all about. It's all make-believe, nothing is permanent down here. It's just an amusement park. Bones is now alive, so it's okay for him to say, I'm a doctor, not a shish kebab. Apparently it's okay if we trust an unknown race who can read any one of our thoughts. So be careful what you wish for in this land of dreams come true, 'cause you just might